Section 180. The Gandharva continued. Then O Partha, Adrisyanti, who had been residing in Vasistha's asylum, brought forth, when the time came, a son, who was perpetuator of Saktri's race, and who was a second Saktri in everything, who foremost of Bharata, that best of Munis, the illustrious Vasistha himself, performed the usual after-birth ceremonies of his grandson, and because the Rishi Vasistha had resolved on self-destruction, but had abstained therefrom as soon as he knew of the existence of that child, when born, was called Parasara, the vivifier of the dead. The virtuous Parasara, from the day of his birth, knew Vasistha for his father, and behaved towards the Muni as such. One day, O son of Kunti, the child addressed Vasistha, that first of Brahmana sages, as father in the presence of his mother Adrisyanti. Adrisyanti, hearing the very intelligible sound, father sweetly uttered by her son, addressed him with tearful eyes and said, O child, do not address this thy grandfather as father. Thy father, O son, has been devoured by a Rakshasa in a different forest. O innocent one, he is not thy father, whom thou regardest so. The reverend one is the father of that celebrated father of thine. Thus addressed by his mother, that best of Rishi of truthful speech, gave way to sorrow, but soon fired up and resolved to destroy the whole creation. Then that illustrious and great ascetic Vasistha, that foremost of all persons conversant with Brahma, that son of Mitravaruna, that Rishi acquainted with positive truth, addressed his grandson who had set his heart upon the destruction of the world. Hear, O Arjuna, that the arguments by which Vasistha succeeded in driving out that resolution from his grandson's mind. The Gandharva continued. Then Vasistha said, there was a celebrated king of the name of Kritavirya. That bull among the kings of the earth was the disciple of the Veda-knowing Brigus. That king, O child, after performing the Soma sacrifice, gratified the Brahmanas with great presents of rice and wealth. After that monarch had ascended to heaven, an occasion came when his descendants were in want of wealth, and knowing that the Brigus were rich, those princes went on to those best of Brahmanas in the guise of beggars. Some amongst the Brigus, to protect their wealth, buried it under earth, and some from fear of the Kshatriyas began to give away their wealth unto other Brahmanas, while some amongst them duly gave on to the Kshatriyas whatever they wanted. It happened, however, that some Kshatriyas, in digging as they pleased at the house of particular Bhargava, came upon a large treasure, and the treasure was seen by all those bulls among Kshatriyas who had been there, enraged at what they regarded as the deceitful behavior of the Brigus. The Kshatriyas insulted the Brahmanas, though the latter asked for mercy, and those mighty bowmen began to slaughter the Brigus with their sharp arrows, and the Kshatriyas wandered over the earth, slaughtering even the embryos that were in the wombs of the women of the Brigu race. And while the Brigu race was thus being exterminated, the women of that tribe fled from fear to the inaccessible mountains of Himavata. And one amongst these women of tapering thighs, desiring to perpetuate her husband's race, held in one of her thighs an embryo, endued with great energy. A certain Brahmana woman, however, who came to know this fact, went from fear unto the Kshatriyas, and reported unto them. And the Kshatriyas then went to destroy that embryo, Arrived at the place, they beheld the would-be mother blazing with inborn energy, and the child that in her thigh came out tearing up the thigh and dazzling the eyes of those Kshatriyas like the midday sun. Thus deprived of their eyes, the Kshatriyas began to wander over those inaccessible mountains, and distressed at the loss of sight, the princes were afflicted with woe, and desirous of regaining the use of their eyes, they resolved to seek the protection of that faultless woman. Then those Kshatriyas, afflicted with sorrow and from loss of sight, like unto a fire that hath gone out, addressed with anxious hearts that illustrious lady, saying, By thy grace, O lady, we wish to be restored to sight. We shall then return to our homes altogether and abstain forever from our sinful practice. O handsome one, it behoveth thee with thy child to show us mercy. It behoveth thee to favor these kings by granting them their eyesights. Thus ends the 180th section in the Chaitra-ratha Parva of the Adi Parva.